Thank you again for being here, everyone. Our first reader tonight is Jim Daniels, and his latest book is a fiction book called The Luck of the Fall. It was published by Michigan State University Press. His recent poetry collections, he is a poet, include The Human Engine at Dawn from Wolfson Press, Gun Shy from Wayne State University Press, and Comment Card, Carnegie Mellon University Press. All of those are still available. His first book of nonfiction, Ignorance of Trees, is forthcoming this fall, or the fall of 2025, from Cornerstone Press. A native of Detroit, he currently lives in Pittsburgh, and he teaches in the Alma College Low Residency MFA program. So welcome, Jim, and the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for showing up on Zoom. And it's a real pleasure to be here reading with Jennifer. So I'm in Pittsburgh, and an old Catholic church was turned into condos, actually. But I'm going to read a poem from my time in Miami to get us started. It's called Faith in Miami, and the epigraph is from this little store that we went into when we were trying to have a baby. It says, each oil is hand-mixed and blessed by authentic practitioners using time-honored family recipes. Faith in Miami. In a strip mall on the edge of Little Haiti, we stumbled into Changio Botanico, a store selling religious articles and pet supplies. She was trying to get pregnant, and I was trying my best to help. The store smelled vaguely, no, not vaguely, but very much like the pet section in the dime stores of my past that sold birds, rabbits, hamsters, kittens, and puppies, pitiful in the stench of filthy cages. If you bought them fast, perhaps they wouldn't die. What a sales pitch. I once got 2 birthday birds from Federal's department store. Both died within a week, stiff at the bottom of the paper-lined cage. So yes, that smell. Behind a curtain on one wall, cages of chickens stacked high and rattling. They only had to live long enough to be sacrificed in a voodoo ritual the clerk offered to teach us. Despite our deep desire for a child, we demurred and instead bought a bottle of red perfumed water labeled fertility. The woman gave my wife the change, then took her hand and held it. While the potion was only good for 1 lunar cycle, ours must have had an extended warranty, powers, since 2 years later, she had our first child. We never even had to open the bottle. And the result of that is in this next poem. I'm reading poems pretty much I've never read before, and except for one poem. So if I stumble, that's my fault. So this is a poem called On the Waiting List. Waiting for the moon to strike 12 and find its other slipper. Waiting for the shrinkage and settling of the package. Waiting to squeeze the air out. Waiting for the syringe, the rush. Waiting for the trail to end abruptly or empty out onto a busy highway. Waiting for the ambulance. Waiting for someone to say, give. Waiting to punch out. Waiting for the lock to lift the ship into deep water. Waiting for the wind to cry Mary. Waiting for the encore, the price check. Waiting to get your money's worth, to be another satisfied customer. Waiting to accumulate. Waiting for the next available parking spot or bathroom stall. Waiting through the previews. Waiting for confirmation. Waiting to recite the names of the dead. Waiting for the echo. Waiting for God, and in lieu of God, waiting for the child, our child, to emerge, bloody and screaming, after all the waiting. This next poem might be the most recent one that I'm reading. It's called French Omelette. It's about it when I was on sabbatical one time. When my parents came to France to visit, they got on the wrong train. We lived in the middle of nowhere, too small for their map. We retrieved them at another station and drove to our small house, surrounded by someone else's grapevines. My father, retired from Ford's in Detroit, could not believe how narrow the roads were, unmarked paths, two-way traffic on one lane, requiring small gestures of deference. On leave, I had a small break for marking papers. My mother had raised 5 kids and nursed her tiny mother till she died. All she wanted was a French omelet. Out of season, the small restaurants nearby were closed. I myself did not know what made an omelet French. We grew up with scrambled eggs on special occasions and hard-boiled at Easter. My 2 small children liked sweet brioche, toasted for breakfast in our dark, stony kitchen. My mother read them bedtime stories. My father built fires in the fireplace. We were all in some version of heaven, but my mother already relied on a cane and wore tinted glasses on the narrowing road to a wheelchair and blindness. She got her omelet in a roadside cafe one sunny February afternoon, warm enough to sit outside on the tiny terrace. She refused to be disappointed with their small, modest lives, their ordinary children. She was in France, eating an omelet, so late she had to keep it from floating away with her fork. Just the 5 of us in the cafe. My father could relax now that she had her omelet. We squinted into the sun with all the time in the world as the clocks briefly paused to grant her that small wish. I keep saying small, even as it grows in memory, looming down from the distant sky years after her passing. I can see that full yellow plate in front of her. She ate it for the rest of her life. And this is the last of the newer poems. It's a report on this summer from Pittsburgh, where I live close to the Monongahela River, where there, excuse me, where there are a lot of homeless encampments. That creates various complications. And just to mention, they tried to accommodate the local graffiti artists by designating part of the trail as a color park, which hasn't worked out so well. So this poem, the title runs into the first line, so I'll just run it in. 200 penises, give or take a couple of penises, spray painted and sprawl across the river trail. Forgive me for not counting them. I know that, like snowflakes, no 2 penises are alike, but these come close with their balloon animal cock and balls, hairless and without detail. I try not to step on the penises, but ... Every stanza ends with a ellipses. A little war going on here on the south side, homeless encampments lining the trail, and the city's bright idea to designate a certain section of it as the color park to allow capital A graffiti artists. How long did that last? Well, ... The city painted over what extended beyond the color park boundaries. The penises covered that fresh paint. They showed each other who's boss. You'd think that might be the end of it, but ... The city put up invitations to peace talks along the trail. Me, I'm just a UN observer or a reporter for the news that stays news. As soon as I write just, I know I'm in trouble. ... I walk past a man fishing in our polluted river. Getting any bites, I ask? Well, he says, ... Oh, that's the summer in Pittsburgh. So I'm going to jump into these couple last poetry collections. And my daughter was here this past weekend, and she works for the State Department, so she's going to Africa for 3 weeks on Friday to give her a sense of how long The see, this poem has the ellipses in it, which is or mentions ellipses, so that's part of my theory in reading this next. But it's called Nostalgia for a Three-Hole Punch. My daughter, the list keeper, neat, deliberate, cursive of casual formality, civilized discussion. For years, she punched holes in lined paper for her series of color-coded three-ring binders with a satisfying whump. White circles littered the floors. Don't ask why loose leaf did not serve. She had a system. When she left for college, I licked my finger to lift them all up from floors throughout the house. The sad confetti of her leaving in lieu of tears. The crooked, shaky steps of a stack of empty binders. The long packing list, scotch taped to her bedroom wall, everything crossed off. I pulled it down, removed the tape. I looked for the punch, but she'd taken it. We did not have a civilized discussion before she left. She hated spiral notebooks, the ragged fray of torn sheets, the distorted circles of cheap bent wire. Tears did not occur, the hard thunk of the punch. Books always get it wrong, periods instead of commas, commas instead of periods. Were they the crumbs of abandonment? Maybe she will return someday. She trailed ellipses out the door. Those are like her breadcrumbs, those little dots. And recently, I just came from Michigan visiting my father, who's going to be 96 in a week, less than a week. And somehow he's still living on his own, but he still lives in Detroit, which is, most of you know, is very close to Canada. And so we would go over to Canada at various points. And we took him, last time I was there, we took him to see the construction of the Gordie Howe Bridge connecting United States and Canada, which is a momentous thing. The great name, Gordie Howe, Mr. Hockey, who was born in Canada and played for Detroit. It's beautiful if you're ever up here. It's not quite done yet. This poem is about a couple of our trips to Canada with my father. It's called Migration, Jack Miner's Bird Sanctuary, Point Pelee, Canada. My father took me to Jack Miner's to watch the Canada geese migrating on the Sunday afternoon of one of my first hangovers, right before I stopped going anywhere with my father. Thousands of geese filled the fields, fall leaves dropped off trees, east rose and fell in honking waves of grace. It hurt to watch them. I could still taste the mix of liquors on my guilty breath. I started tearing up against that wild wind and turned away from him to scan the sky. 14, the hangover sharpened the view and forced to squint. I guzzled a Coke bottle plucked from a rusty old machine, and it bit into my gut. The geese knew where they were going. My shoulders shook with a heaving bout of tears I hadn't had in years, my eyes so red I couldn't pretend. They're beautiful, I said to say something. When I was 10, my father and I had dipped for smelt at Point Pelee late at night during the annual smelt run, pulling in a garbage can full. I waded cold water and pulled the net towards shore where he held the other end. Fires and trash cans, drunk men cursing into a clear night full of forgiving stars. In the back of the car on the long ride home, I pressed my ear against a rough plaid blanket kept in the trunk for emergencies. My father, retired from Ford's, writes to tell me he saw the monarchs gather at Point Pelee on their migration across Lake Erie to Ohio. Trying to catch butterflies with my hands, I'd killed a few. Monarchs, the only kind we saw in fields between factories. I could not name any of the pale moths dying against the porch light as I waited for my father to come home from work. Butterflies have short lives. Geese stick together, mate for life. As I read his ragged scrawl, I almost hear his voice squawking like wild geese, flapping across the page. How do the monarchs know when to cross the wide water? My instinct is to call it love. Here at the end, I have to say something. And two more poems. Thanks. From this, The Human Engine at Dawn. This poem is kind of set during some of Detroit's lowest points in terms of their, it's coming back, but it went it had a lot of issues for a lot of years and was struggling. And under the backdrop of that is this kind of story of my grandfather's old house, which we ended up just abandoning and moving them out one day. It's called To Tell You the Truth. To tell you the truth is an admission of lying, or the faint whiff of confiding, like the smoke, the burn from down the block. My grandfather says, "See, I told you I smelled fire." He sprayed down his house with a garden hose as his neighbors burned. This is what we call telling truth in my family. We try to keep lies from spreading. We've got enough lies, thank you. My grandfather crackled silence and static in lieu of the truth about his own dead son and daughter. 50 years later, I found their graves and brushed off snow and dead leaves and tears. To tell you the truth, I don't know why I cried. I will never know, since he did not tell me they even existed, ever. To tell you the truth, I rounded up to 50, more like 47. The night ticking clock paces in the dark. My grandfather bought the burnt out lot from the city next door for $5. The crack whores who lingered had a fondness for the old man and still stopped by to visit. They brought empty milk jugs for his collection. It did not steal the $20 bill pinned to his shirt pocket. To tell you the truth, we did not lie much in my family and thus said little. The house on the other side burned down too. For a time, it was a sick sport in Detroit in autumn or any other time of year, burning abandoned houses. He did not keep those children's photos pinned inside his pocket. It took some searching for the graves after he died. We moved him from that house to Detroit to another, smaller one in Warren. Did the ghosts complain as we loaded them up in a borrowed truck, intent on getting out of there before dark, the electricity already turned off? We did not linger in that darkness. You have probably already guessed the truth of that abandoned house falling like the tree in the proverbial forest, but we did not hear it. We were not there. And I'm going to finish with a poem that I have read before recently, and it's because I feel like I need to read it tonight, given that this is yet another time where I found myself imposing a news blackout on myself due to despair. Okay, some of you might be there yourselves. And being from Detroit, Aretha Franklin was from Detroit, so the poem is called Aretha in the Age of Trump. All I was able to do lately was listen to Aretha. I was worried she was going to die on me, and she did. Aretha, I shouted into my basement's void, but the furnace did not kick on. Her middle name, Louise. She didn't even need a last name. I've never known another Aretha. I didn't know this one except from afar. Geez, Louise. Those days I needed a lot of blank space so I could listen to Aretha. Rise on the wave of that voice with a symphony or a cappella, no matter, all matter. In days of held grudges and mine, it beat endlessly washing your hands. I don't need to know anything else about Aretha, just the voice swelling, soaring smooth. I'm going to forget her middle name. Crumbling boulders, the bad news network bought out by the worst news network. Lying taken as common sense, as a label on a stool softener. Absence of even a decent disguise. Domination of the mean spirit in lieu of turning up the furnace. Aretha, oh, Aretha. Walking Detroit streets, remember that smell? December, air, smokestacks and snow. A long time ago, we walked the same, but not the same streets. I never sang in her daddy's church. I fled my own church in what now seems like pettiness, nostalgic for the shelter of any place that values decency. I was cold in relative proximity to her cold. Oh, to see her steamy breath rising in the joyful notes above the slushy streets. To hear one note against all the bad news and worse. What is it about Aretha that makes me turn it up? I mean, turn it up. All of it, any of it, against daily outrage, slow blues, surging soul, gospel of gospel, jazz of soaring spirit. Nobody talking about the spirit in the dark or in the light. Talking points, scratching all the old records. Her hat at Obama's inauguration, displayed at the Smithsonian as artifact, a relic, 1,000 years ago. The man who made that hat is from Detroit. Our homes never leave us, even when we lose faith, even when betrayal erodes the bricks and the necessary voices remain uncounted. Aretha's voice climbs the scales up into floating. Aretha all the time in the face of fascism, solving the daily wounds to decency, the scars to come. Forgive me, Louise, my lingering down there, hiding from out here. My hands warming at the embrace of Aretha, the only news I could stand. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That was wonderful. In fact, I was so engrossed in what you were saying, I almost forgot to put links in the chat. I had to tell myself to get on my job here. So thank you again. That was just fascinating.
Thanks.